Okay, so I decided to set myself a challenge today. It's a live challenge, so there will be a timer running in the background once we get started. And I put out a request on LinkedIn, and the most prominent one came through as ISO 27001. So I'm going to try and help you kickstart your ISO 27001 journey in less than 40 minutes. Now, I've never done this before. This is live. This is not what is ISO 27001. This is I'm ready to get started. So my assumption is you already have a copy of ISO 27001 and ISO 27002. If not, get yourself a copy in the links below, and then you should be ready to get going. So, this is not scripted at all. I literally only have the books, my whiteboard, and chat. So I'm going to build it from scratch, essentially, within less than 40 minutes. So as you see here, it's now 5 to 11 Adelaide time. I'm going to keep that clock running in the background. And yeah, let's get started. So, timer's on. Essentially, all we have to do is meet the requirements of these 10 pages in ISO 27001. So where do we start? So essentially, the standard itself starts off with context. So like anything, you've got to understand why it is you're doing what you're doing in the first place. You are the best person to understand that and understand why you need information security. So it's not just the fact that within a contract or a tender requirement you have to have certification. There has to be more to it, right? So quite conveniently, I do tackle this requirement in the very first sections of my book, Resilience by Design. The whole point is so you can understand and relate to why you're doing information security in the first place. First part is understanding your company's risk profile. So where are you exposing yourself to vulnerabilities based on the systems that you use, what you do, who your clients are, and what your stakeholder expectations are. So again, get yourself a copy of my book. I give you step-by-step instructions of how you can build on that understanding, really properly explore that. So first place I would start there is essentially understanding your stakeholder needs and expectations. So based on your industry, what is expected of you? So let's do an example. I have a So if you don't know where to start, let's ask chat. Ideally, you'll have some legal representation and someone within your governance team, if you're that big, to help you establish what your legal regulatory requirements are. There are also industry standards. So I'll put what regulations and industry standards are relevant to my business here in Adelaide, South Australia. So let's see what chat comes back with. And essentially what you need to do is put together a simple table that outlines each of these requirements and how you're going to meet those requirements. So let's put a table together in the first instance while chat's thinking. Let's put regulations and standards, the requirement, and how we meet the requirement. And I guess you do a little bit of a gap assessment, you know, are we actually meeting what's expected of us right now? And then, you know, what are the gaps? Because this will really give you some true direction of where you need to focus your efforts. So let's create a little table. All right, so core laws. So we've got the Privacy Act, ASIC expectations. So just put ASIC. All right. Well, let's ask chat to put this in a table. Please enter these. Table. Awesome. It's still going. All right, let's copy that. Copy that, put that in here. And we've got our starting point. So it's actually laid out, you know, what the key expectations are, what evidence and assurance is required to satisfy that requirement. But let's change this one. I don't care about the notes, but it's more what are the gaps? So do we have privacy policy, privacy impact assessments, and access controls? So that's our first assessment is, you know, based on who we are, what we do, in the first instance, are we meeting the minimum expectations of that? You know, do we do risk assessment? Does it incorporate the requirements of the regulations that we need to comply with? So, yeah, so that's your first pass. I'll save that so I can put it in the material. Save as regulations. All right. Next, what we need to do is to expand on this once we've got a grip of, you know, what we're legally expected to do. Is add another sheet here to understand, you know, who are our stakeholders. What do we think their expectations are? How they're met, and what the gaps are. again, are we meeting the expectations of who we serve? So stakeholders can be anyone who has a interest in your cybersecurity program. So let's have a look what the definitions are in the standard. So this is where 27002 comes in handy, because it gives a real explanation as to, the definitions used in 27001, and then it broadens it out for you. So interested party or stakeholder is a person or organization that can affect or be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by, a decision or activity. So it's literally, it could be anyone. So let's again see what chat comes up with. We provide online mortgages and car finance. So if you can't think of who your stakeholders are or who they're likely to be, it doesn't have to be very comprehensive. It's just to get an overview of who you need to consider when you're making decisions within your ISMS. So let's see what chat comes up with. And again, I cover stakeholder needs and expectations, risk profiling within chapters 1 through to 8. So chapters 1 through to 8 of my book go into a bit more detail as to what you need to consider as part of the evaluation phase. So it's understanding the context of information security to your organization. All right. So chat's given us again a great list of who the stakeholders could possibly be. So I'm not going to read too much into this just yet. I wonder if I can copy and put that into my spreadsheet. Yeah, so it's got stakeholder, why they matter, the likely expectations that they have, and how we can evidence that. So this is essentially what we're working towards with our ISMS in terms of its context to our organisation. We can really then hone in on this and understand, what controls are actually then relevant. So if you see here, we've got vendor risk assessments, we've got privacy impact assessments, we've got SOC 2, Type 2, audits and things like that. So that's telling us, okay, well, in our statement of applicability, all of these control requirements are therefore applicable. Stakeholders. So then what we need to do is to outline, okay, what is in terms of context for our organization. We know that we need to meet ISO 27001, SOC 2, Type 2, probably Essential 8 for Australian companies. What are the control areas? EPRA 234, EPRA 230. All right, so each of these security control standards have a set of controls that you need to consider within your framework. So, and there could be more. So, if we, for example, within this company process card payments, then we need to also add in PCI DSS, which is the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. And again, it gives us a full shopping list of controls that we need to consider or have as part of our risk management program. So that will really drive and direct your approach to information security risk assessments, because it's got a whole heap of controls that are now relevant that you need to evaluate yourself against. So put that through your risk management program if you don't have one. What you need to do is look at the standard requirements for risk assessment, and in particular looking at 27,002, you got the attributes of controls and the requirements, how they're there to manage risk, but also in 27,001, within the first section, these 10 pages that I'm telling you about, gives us a very clear definition of planning. So section or clause 6, actions to address risk and opportunities. So if your risk management framework doesn't consider information security risks, that's the next thing that you need to do. So if you don't have one, let's create one from scratch. Create a let's see what it gives us. I mean, I guess this is the benefit of things like Copilot and chat. It, means we're not starting from a blank page. Doesn't mean that you trust exactly what comes out of it, but it gives you sections to consider. So you then match what it spat out for you here against what the standard expects to see in place. You'll probably have to elaborate a bit more on this. I mean, what's the asset inventory? Again, in the standard, it outlines what is expected within the information security asset inventory. This isn't the financials of assets that you have. This is more around, it could be intangibles, people, methodologies and things like that. What assets support your organization that you need to protect? So intellectual property, for example. What's the impact of loss of those assets? So this is not a very good one that it's actually spat out, but you can elaborate on each area. As long as you meet the requirements in the standard, you're covering off all your bases, pretty much. Now, okay, so if you already have a risk framework, ensure that it also meets the requirements. So it may have to have a review and an update accordingly. Next thing, so we've set context. We understand the controls that are relevant to us based on our context. So far, this is like phase 1. We can then go away and do a risk assessment. while that's going on, the other aspects that you need to put in place is the structure of your ISMS. Let's see. Oh crap. We're now 13 minutes past 11. So I've been talking now for nearly 20 minutes. Halfway there. Awesome. So once you've got the context, what is important is in the 10 pages that are covered in the beginning of 27001 really gives you that framework for how you manage your ISMS. And it's that is actually getting certified. You're not certifying against everything else. You're certifying against these 10 pages at the very beginning, because that is your management system, and it sets the structure for how you continually improve. So, to do that, we need to define roles and responsibilities. So, if you haven't already, the next thing is to go, okay, well, how are we going to manage this thing? What does it look like? So clause 5 then takes us into leadership, management and commitment, the policy. So what is it? What does information security mean to our business? And then organizational roles, responsibility and authority. So what typically happens, depending on the size of your organization, you may have a committee that sits at the top. And that's where all the decisions and approvals take place. Right, and that's really the direction. So they're accountable for ensuring that whatever's created within the ISMS is actually supporting the business needs and objectives. Now, also, again, depending on the size of your organisation, you may also have a working group that starts off implementing. So the working group will be the ones actually taking us through this project, implementing the requirements of the standard, and then once it's set up and operational, because you're assessing yourself against an operational ISMS, they then take on that operational oversight role. So it's a continual improvement process. So 27001 follows the standard plan do check act process here. Which should be familiar if you've ever implemented like 9001 or any other ISO standard. It's all about continual improvement. So we start here in the planning phase, which is establishing context. Why is it important to us? What do we need to focus on? Do is implementing the controls that we know that we're weak in. So this is typically, your approved project plan to get up to speed. The check element is where we then go, okay, well, let's validate what we have in place. Is it appropriate? Can we make some improvements? And then act is then, improving on those activities and taking action. And it's that continual life cycle throughout the life of your ISMS. So we've got to start somewhere, okay? So this initial bit can be a project, but the whole program itself needs to be maintained over time, hence continual improvement. So what the standard actually emphasizes is that, you don't have to have everything 100% before you can become certified to 27001. As long as you've got the core structures in place to be able to meet all the requirements in clauses 4 to 10 within ISO 27001, that's what you get certified against. So you can prove leadership and commitment. We've defined our scope, we understand the controls that are relevant to our organisation based on what we do and how we do it. We understand who our stakeholders are and what they need from us. So, that may also give us some milestones for reporting, and some very specific controls that we need to report on more regularly than others. We've got commitment through resourcing here in the working group. We got the risk assessment going on in the background, hopefully. And then once we've done that first risk assessment, we've identified the controls that we must have in place based on stakeholder needs and expectations, but also baseline security control requirements. And in addition, we've got those specific controls that are cast as key controls that help us to manage the risks that we identify through risk assessment. So there's a couple of layers there in the control selection. Once we understand what we need and when we need it, so we can prioritize the control implementation from there. We can, chop off those low-hanging fruits, get those things out of the way and done. And then it's prioritizing based on risk. Now, the new ISO 27001-2022 is heavily risk focused, whereas before it used to be based on the controls. You only really need to focus on efforts and resources on the controls that are going to have the most impact. And then once we understand that, we understand our profile, we can then formulate our information security strategy for the next 1, 2, 3 years, depending on your cycle of strategies. So again, in the standard in 6.2, it clearly outlines what your objectives need to include. So I'll just go through some here. So it says the information security objectives shall be consistent with the information security policy, so it needs to be aligned. Be measurable, take into account applicable information security requirements and results from risk assessment and risk treatment, so everything that we've just discussed. And then clause 7 is support, so we're proving our support through applying the resources. And another important element is to understand our competency. So who is it within these groups and what do they understand? So do we have someone at the committee level who understands information security, cybersecurity risks? Do they understand business continuity risks or regulatory requirements and things like that? Do we have the right decision makers up here? And within this group, do we have the right skill sets and capabilities to actually implement? So have these guys here been placed on a 27001 implementers course, for example? Do they have the background and experience? You could be using consultants for both of these layers to demonstrate that you've got the right competency requirements, because that could be something that's built over time. Myself, I like to do a bit of mentoring and handover when I'm with a client, so I know that when I'm gone, they've still got the in-house capabilities to maintain this plan, do, check, act cycle over time, so they understand what the ISMS actually is, how it operates, so they can build momentum. Awareness comes into place. You need to have an information security awareness program. So based on, who you are, where you work, where your exposures are, who needs what training. So it needs to be audience specific. So not just a general awareness package for everybody. You may tailor the security awareness to executives, to the board, and then again there may be a different training and awareness program for frontline staff or those within the call centre and things like that, based on the information that they process, based on the tools that they use and things like that. And then part of this now, importantly, is that there's a communication strategy. So who else needs to be aware of our ISMS? How does it impact them? So that comes back to our stakeholders. What is it that they need to know? What are our expectations of them within our environment? And how do we communicate that? So you may have a online, I don't know, what's the word? An intranet page, for example, for your staff, and that could be layered based on where they work in the organisation and what's expected of them, things like that. You could run, I don't know, quarterly phishing campaigns and things like that. It just helps us to think about, communication around the ISMS and the control implementation requirements. There's an element in 27001 which looks at how we control documents and records, because we need to demonstrate that the ISMS itself is operational. So implement some good controls around document management. And then lastly, clauses 9 and 10 are around continual improvement. So how do we monitor and measure? So how do we know that the ISMS is succeeding? So this is the check act element of that life cycle. So, based on the gap assessment that you do at the very beginning, the controls that you do have in place, how confident are you that they're actually working as designed? Are they really effective? So you good to define some of the key metrics that you look at to prove, validate that the controls are effective. That might be through standard reporting, audits, obviously, and setting OKR, so objectives and key results for those control areas. So such as training is a control area. You can set percentage pass rate or coverage of staff and things like that, just to give you an overview of completion or coverage of that control. But then you may choose another metric that validates the effectiveness of that. So for example, we could use phishing as a tool to validate that people are aware of what the requirements are. Performance evaluation includes internal audit, so it's having someone who is separate from implementation of the ISMS to actually review, validate that the ISMS is operational, and based on your stakeholder needs and expectations, they may have a higher frequency of control validation requirements. So some areas you may have to audit, do a deep dive audit every 6 months, for example. But that should be established within your internal audit program. When it comes to internal audits, if you're using an external auditor, they're there to help you, so ensure that they're covering off the most important controls each time, and not just looking at the same control areas, because they're, it needs to be of value and give benefit to you since you're paying them for that. And lastly is the full management review process. That should be done at least annually, which enables you to sit back from operations and go, okay, well, how, are we achieving what we expect? Is the ISMS covering everything that we need it to? Are there any changes internally or externally? Again, I cover off that within the PESTOR assessments within my book, just to help with that full review process, sort of thinking a bit more laterally about it. And Part of the management review is to look at those audit findings, again, build some measures and metrics. How many audit findings did we have last year? How many did we close out? Is our program effective? Do we have any new products or services that we need to bring into the ISMS itself that we need to consider? And then the output from management review is that continual improvement place. So it may be, okay, well, the privacy reform has come through. It has new expectations and requirements of us. This is how it's impacting our ISMS, and this is what we need to do. So that's demonstrating that you're considering everything within and outside your organisation and how it impacts your ISMS, so you can make changes to suit. So it's a living process. It's a living document, and you're reacting to the needs and expectations of the company and of your stakeholders, and that's essentially what it's about. And then it's essentially the act bit, sort of taking action on those findings that come through. Are you closing out the audit findings within a reasonable period of time? Are you identifying new control requirements? Are you focusing on the right areas for your organisation? And that's pretty much it. So that's the clauses 4 to 10 of the standard, which you actually get certified to if you go down that journey. All of this helps you stand up your ISMS. You've got clearly defined roles and responsibilities. You've got an action plan. You've got your risk evaluation. And you've got the continual review process. And that's essentially it. So we are now at 11:30. So I think I did it in 35 minutes. So no, that's great. So this has just been a quick Kickstarter for anyone who's looking at implementing 27001. It's not as scary as it first seems. Step away from the massive number of controls for the time being. Let's look at structuring the framework really for the ISMS, so you can succeed and deliver it within a meaningful time frame. Yes, there are standard policies and procedures that this 27001 and 27002 expect to see in place. However, that's not the be all and end all. It is not a document focused standard. So I hope you've taken a lot out of today's session. It's completely, as I say, unscripted, plenty of bloopers, I'm sure. If I've confused you, please let me know and I'll try again. If I've helped you, please let me know, and let me know how you're tracking with implementing your ISMS. Again, this hasn't been a full implementation course of 27001 and 2, because that's typically over 3 to 5 days, and there's a lot to go through. This is more, right, let's just get started, let's get doing something, and hopefully I've given you some traction in the right direction. So thank you. Please subscribe to my channels, and let me know what else you'd like to know.